The biological caste system. Within the first generation of this new reality, society aggressively reorganizes itself into a brutal, inescapable biological caste system based entirely on a person's remaining time. The glowing numbers on your forearm become the ultimate decider of your human worth. We no longer divide people by wealth, race, or geography, but by their lifespan. Those with 80 or 90 years left, the long-timers, are instantly elevated to the top of the social hierarchy. They are deemed the only worthwhile investments for corporations, governments, and elite universities. Conversely, the short-timers, those born with clocks ticking down to their 20s or 30s, are completely marginalized. Why would a company waste resources training an employee who is mathematically destined to expire in 5 years? The short-timers are forced into grueling, high-risk manual labor, or left to rot in the slums, viewed by the rest of the world as walking ghosts. True equality is permanently shattered, replaced by a cold, deterministic prejudice, where your exact expiration date dictates every single opportunity you will ever receive in your life.
The death of ambition. For millions of people across the globe, the fundamental motivation to participate in society completely evaporates overnight. When a teenager looks down at their wrist and sees that their clock has exactly 4 years left, the entire concept of long-term planning becomes an agonizing, pointless joke. Why would they study for a college entrance exam? Why would they save money, follow the law, or worry about a retirement plan? A massive wave of existential apathy washes over the younger generations. Schools empty out. The traditional milestones of the human experience, buying a house, building a career, investing in the future, are violently erased for anyone whose timer doesn't stretch past middle age. Instead, society witnesses the rise of hyper-hedonism. Millions of people abandon their responsibilities to chase instant gratification, living in a constant, desperate state of sensory overload. The slow, patient building of a meaningful life is replaced by a frantic, terrified sprint to consume as much pleasure as physically possible before the inescapable counter finally hits zero.
The invincibility syndrome. A terrifying psychological phenomenon emerges among the long-timers, fundamentally altering the way human beings perceive physical danger. If your clock absolutely guarantees that you will not die for another 60 years, it means you are functionally immortal until that exact second. This realization strips away the primal evolutionary fear of death that has kept human behavior in check for millennia. People with decades left on their clocks begin engaging in horrifically reckless, violent, and dangerous behavior. They jump from buildings for the thrill of the agonizing survival, knowing the universe will mathematically force them to live through the trauma. Crime skyrockets as the long-timers realize they cannot be killed by police or rival factions. Wars are fought exclusively by soldiers with decades on their timers, resulting in battlefields filled with catastrophic, permanent injuries rather than fatalities. The human body becomes a disposable, indestructible playground, and the natural instinct for basic self-preservation is completely erased by the dark comfort of absolute destiny.
The burden of romance, the complex, beautiful landscape of human love and marriage, is violently reduced to a cold, mathematical transaction. The concept of growing old together becomes a luxury reserved strictly for those with perfectly matching clocks. When choosing a romantic partner, the very first thing people demand to see is not a personality, a bank account, or a face, but the exact number of days remaining on their wrist. Heartbreak is calculated in advance. No one wants to fall deeply in love with a person whose clock dictates they will inevitably perish in 3 years, leaving the survivor to endure half a century of guaranteed, agonizing grief. Expiration dating becomes the new norm, where algorithms match individuals purely based on their synchronized times of death. If your partner's clock is suddenly revealed to be decades shorter than yours, relationships are ruthlessly terminated out of pure psychological self-preservation. Love is no longer a blind leap of faith. It is a meticulously managed risk assessment, heavily restricted by the suffocating boundaries of our predetermined timelines.
The economic restructuring. The global financial system is forced into a brutal, unforgiving restructuring process, permanently tying a person's economic value directly to their remaining breath. The concept of a 30-year mortgage, a long-term business loan, or a retirement pension becomes entirely obsolete for more than half the population. Banks deploy ruthless algorithms that scan your death clock the moment you walk through the doors. If you have 10 years left to live, you are universally denied credit, unable to buy a home or start a business, entirely locked out of the financial ecosystem. The entire life insurance industry collapses overnight, replaced by time assurance firms that prey on the families of the soon-to-be deceased. Healthcare becomes a grotesque moral calculation. Hospitals categorically refuse expensive, life-saving surgeries or organ transplants to anyone whose clock proves they will die shortly anyway. The medical industry stops treating illnesses and merely becomes a palliative waiting room, aggressively hoarding resources exclusively for those the universe has mathematically deemed worthy of more time to live.
The final year purge. As an individual's clock drops below the 365-day mark, a deeply unsettling psychological transformation takes hold. They enter the final year, a terrifying societal gray zone where the standard consequences of law and morality simply no longer apply. Prisons become utterly meaningless deterrents. You cannot threaten a man with a life sentence when his life is guaranteed to end on Tuesday. A terrifying percentage of people in their final months completely abandon all moral constraints, indulging their darkest, most violent and repressed urges. Serial theft, brutal revenge, and chaotic destruction become rampant among those who have absolutely nothing left to lose. To combat this, society develops highly segregated terminal zones, heavily militarized, lawless cities where people in their final days are forcibly exiled to live out their remaining hours. The rest of the world watches these zones with terrified fascination, a grim daily reminder of the absolute monsters human beings can quickly become when the heavy burden of tomorrow is finally lifted from their shoulders.
The maternity ward horror. The most profoundly devastating psychological trauma of this new reality occurs daily in the quiet, sterile rooms of hospital maternity wards. The miracle of birth is completely overshadowed by the terrifying, immediate revelation of the child's expiration date. Parents do not look at their newborn's face. They immediately rip away the blankets to aggressively check the glowing numbers on the infant's skin. The sheer, unfathomable agony of a mother realizing she has just given birth to a child whose clock reads only 6 months or 3 years shatters the human psyche. There is no hope, no bargaining, and no medical miracle that can alter the numbers. They are forced to raise their child in a state of constant, suffocating, preemptive grief, counting down the literal seconds until their baby is mathematically stolen from them. Conversely, giving birth to a long-timer is treated as a lottery win, creating a disturbing dynamic where parents emotionally attach to or violently detach from their own offspring within seconds of birth, based entirely on the cold verdict of the clock.
The deterministic prison. The ultimate crushing weight of the death clock is not the fear of dying, but the horrifying philosophical realization that we have absolutely no free will. For centuries, human beings found comfort in the beautiful illusion that we are the active authors of our own destiny. But the glowing, inescapable numbers permanently prove that our lives are strictly written on a predetermined script. Every choice, every accident, and every careful precaution is utterly meaningless against the cold, hard mathematics of the universe. If you cannot die before your clock hits 0, and you cannot survive a single second past it, then you are not truly living. You are simply riding a biological conveyor belt toward an unchangeable drop-off point. Society falls into a deep, inescapable spiritual depression. Religions collapse entirely as the concept of divine intervention is replaced by a fixed, unfeeling algorithm. We realize the darkest truth of all. The ultimate freedom was never the ability to live forever. The ultimate freedom was simply the beautiful, terrifying mystery of not knowing what happens tomorrow.